I can still feel the heat rising in my face the moment those words hit the room. After 16 years leading classified cyber integration work, I was humiliated in front of federal officials by a man who couldn't even get clearance to access the documents I wrote. That day, something inside me snapped, not in anger, but in clarity. He thought I was powerless, invisible, replaceable. What he didn't know was that the people in that room trusted me far more than the company behind my badge. Before we begin, subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I spent most of my career believing that the work would speak for me. 16 years inside Stratwell Systems, buried in secure basements, briefing colonels who dealt with more pressure in a week than most executives handle in a lifetime. I never asked for spotlight or applause. I just wanted the mission to run clean, safe, and precise. People assume defense work is glamorous because it touches national security. But the truth is, it's a grind made of sleepless nights, encrypted calls at odd hours, and endless responsibility. That responsibility became part of me, almost like a second spine, one that kept me upright even when everything else in life felt unpredictable. Outside the office, my world was quieter. My wife, Ava, always joked that I'd married the job before I married her. She wasn't wrong. Our daughter Lila was gearing up for college applications, and my son Jordan had football practice that seemed to swallow every other afternoon. Between tuition plans, property taxes, and a mortgage that still had a long life ahead of it, switching careers never felt like an option. Stability mattered. The familiar mattered. As long as Stratwell valued me, I thought I'd be there until retirement. For years, the people I worked with respected what I brought to the table. Colonel Dana Hughes was one of them. She and I had been navigating complex systems integrations for 6 years, and she relied on my judgment the same way I relied on her straightforward honesty. She once told me that in her line of work, competence wasn't appreciated. It was essential. I held on to that. It kept me grounded. Unlike many people in corporate offices, the colonel didn't care about polished presentations or buzzwords. She cared about accuracy, clarity, and whether the person briefing her could do the job without endangering a timeline or a mission. And for years, that person was me. My days weren't glamorous. They were demanding. I managed classified cyber upgrade models, handled system vulnerabilities, and walked generals through potential breach points. A single wrong detail could derail an entire program and set off chain reactions that the public would never hear about. That weight didn't scare me, it motivated me. Maybe that's why it stung so much when everything changed. Before the restructuring, Stratwell felt like home. The CEO, Victor Brewster, trusted me. He didn't hover. He didn't question every decision. He asked for results, and I delivered. It wasn't personal praise that kept me loyal. It was the quiet acknowledgement that what I did mattered. But companies evolve, and sometimes they evolve into something you no longer recognize. When the restructuring announcement hit, I told myself it would be fine. New leadership always shakes the floor a little. People move, departments shift, roles stretch. I didn't expect comfort. I just expected continuity. I didn't know that everything I had built, all the relationships, the trust, the years of experience, could be dismissed so quickly by someone who believed that leadership came from a resume instead of earned respect. I didn't know that one person could walk in and crack the foundation I had spent half my adult life strengthening. But I was about to find out. When the restructuring memo first hit my inbox, I skimmed it with the same kind of casual indifference you give to mandatory HR updates. Changes to reporting lines, a few new titles, some talk about modernizing operations. Nothing felt immediately threatening. But then came the name I hadn't heard before. Mason Kellerman, Vice President of Strategic Transformation. Even the title felt like it had been created in a boardroom full of people who'd never stepped inside a secure facility. I didn't give him much thought until the day he showed up. He walked into our wing wearing a suit that cost more than some of the servers we used for testing, smiling like he already owned the place. His handshake was firm in the way someone's is when they want to prove something. And just like that, he slotted himself between every layer of work I'd managed for years. The first week was mostly observation. Him trailing behind people, asking high-level questions, scribbling in a notebook like he was collecting data for an organizational exposé. I didn't mind that part. Every new leader wants to evaluate their kingdom. But what unsettled me was the confidence behind his ignorance. He'd ask about timelines for classified integrations, ignore the technical explanation, and instead want to know how to streamline the communication model or introduce stakeholders earlier to maximize buy-in. Those words meant something in corporate environments, but when dealing with federal agencies overseeing national security projects, they meant almost nothing. Still, I tried to be patient. I walked him through our program requirements, our key contacts, the strict rules around communication, and the reasons certain protocols couldn't be bent. He listened long enough to pretend he absorbed it, then shot back with, "Okay, but what if we reimagined the entire workflow to create a single pipeline under my office?" I remember blinking at him, unsure if he understood the consequences of centralizing communications under someone without federal clearance. He brushed that off too. In his world, authority flowed from the top down, as if the highest degree determined competence. He didn't grasp that in our world, my world, competence flowed from experience, earned trust, and a track record that spanned years. Mason didn't want to understand the culture. He wanted to replace it. He started with small things. He canceled our weekly team sync and replaced it with something called Vision Hours, where he lectured us on business ideology that had nothing to do with our work. Then he rearranged responsibilities, shifting key tasks away from people who had years of specialized knowledge to others who had simply impressed him with their energy. Energy didn't keep systems secure. Energy didn't get clearance approvals. Energy didn't explain to colonels why a timeline needed adjusting without triggering a program audit. One afternoon, a junior analyst pulled me aside and whispered that Mason had been asking around about which federal contacts I still needed direct access to. The implication was clear. He was planning to insert himself between me and the people I had worked with for years. He had no idea how dangerous that was, or how quickly it would unravel everything we depended on to move contracts forward. The worst part wasn't his lack of understanding. It was his belief that he understood enough to disrupt what he didn't respect. He believed leadership meant control, not competence. He believed clearance was a formality instead of a process forged from years of scrutiny, and he believed that someone like me, quiet, steady, head down in classified systems, was someone he could manage like a junior analyst who needed direction. I felt something shifting inside Stratwell, like a slow, inevitable tilt. It wasn't one catastrophic moment. It was the accumulation of decisions made by someone who thought the stakes were theoretical, not real. People like Mason always think systems bend to their will. They don't understand that some structures fight back. And I had no idea yet just how violently his ignorance would collide with the world we worked in, until the day he stepped into a briefing he should never have approached. The morning of the briefing, I woke up before my alarm, the kind of uneasy instinct that crawls along your ribs when you know the day is going to demand more than you have to give. I'd spent the past 8 months developing the classified architecture for a $52 million cyber infrastructure upgrade, a project so sensitive that I slept with my secure tablet locked inside a case bolted to the underside of my nightstand. Colonel Hughes had personally requested that I walk her team through the final integration model. It was the kind of responsibility I didn't take lightly, and one I had earned through years of showing up prepared, precise, and trustworthy. I arrived at the Cyber Command Complex early, badge already clipped, stomach tight with the familiar focused tension that came with high-level briefings. The room smelled like recycled air and burnt coffee, dimly lit until the projector flickered awake. I organized my notes, double-checked the encryption seals on the files, and rehearsed the opening in my mind. Everything felt controlled, steady, and then Mason walked in, 22 minutes late. He strode into the room with the casual confidence of someone who had never once been held accountable for the consequences of their own decisions. His suit jacket was slung over one arm, his tie loose like he'd come from a networking lunch instead of a classified briefing with federal officers. I saw the flicker of surprise on Colonel Hughes's face, surprise laced with irritation. Mason didn't notice. He rarely did. He scanned the room as if he owned it, then gave me a thin smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "Eliana," he said loudly, "you can take a seat. I'll take it from here." The words hit so sharply that for a moment I genuinely thought I misheard him. The colonel turned slowly toward him. "Mr. Kellerman," she said, voice controlled, "we specifically asked for Eliana to present." "Of course," he replied with a grin too polished to be sincere. "And I appreciate her help assembling the materials, but this briefing is ultimately strategic, and I think my overview will be more aligned with what your team needs." You could feel the air shift. The other officers sat straighter, eyes bouncing between us. I felt my pulse collecting in my throat, pounding in a rhythm that drowned out every logical thought. "Mason," I said quietly, "the classified components—" He cut me off with a lazy wave. "Don't worry about that. Let the grown-ups handle this." The room froze. Even the projector's soft hum seemed to vanish. I felt heat crawl up my neck, then settle in the pit of my stomach like a stone. Grown-ups, as if my 16 years in classified systems meant nothing, as if my clearance was a hobby, as if the officers in that room hadn't trusted me for years with information Mason couldn't legally view. For a long, silent second, nobody moved. Then Colonel Hughes stood. Not abruptly, deliberately. She positioned herself so squarely in front of Mason that he finally realized something was wrong. "Mr. Kellerman," she said, each syllable carved clean and sharp. "Do you have federal clearance to discuss the classified elements of this proposal?" Mason blinked. "Well, I don't need the specifics to give a strategic overview." "That's not what I asked." It was the kind of tone that could make a roomful of colonels sit straighter. Mason faltered. "Not yet." "Then you are not authorized to speak in this briefing." Her gaze moved to me, steady and unapologetic. "Eliana, continue when you're ready." For a second, I couldn't breathe. The humiliation was still burning through me, but beneath it, something else began to stir. An old flame, slow and certain. Anger. Not the reckless kind, the righteous kind. I resumed the briefing with painfully measured calm, but part of me had already left the room. Something had cracked clean through the center of my loyalty. When the colonel concluded the session, she pulled me aside. "Call me directly next time," she said. "No interference." Her hand briefly touched my arm, steady and firm. "You deserve better." And in that small gesture, something shifted permanently. Mason tried to salvage his pride afterward, babbling about chain of command and corporate visibility, but I barely heard him. I was too busy replaying that moment, the dismissive wave, the word grown-ups, the officer's stunned silence. That was the exact second I realized that staying at Stratwell wouldn't just cost me my dignity, it might cost me my career. And Mason had no idea yet what he'd started. Driving home after that briefing felt like moving through fog, the kind that blurs the world just enough to make you question what's real and what you imagined. I kept replaying the moment Mason told me to sit down, as if I were a child interrupting adults, as if my years of classified work were nothing more than background noise to his performance. By the time I pulled into our driveway,